I asked if any of my followers are interested in making their own beats, and I got a lot of responses curious about my process. So I'm going to share 9 simple steps any beginner can use to start making neo soul sounding beats, from the instrumentation to basic mixing and mastering tips. The first thing that I start with is the drums, and the foundation of a drum beat is broken into 3 parts: kick, snare, hi-hat. One of the biggest parts to producing a track is finding the right sound or sample. So I search around on Splice, and sometimes I'll reference a track to find that exact sound that I'm looking for. Next, I build a basic beat. The majority of beats are going to have the snare on 2 and 4, so right away I put it right there. Hi-hats are often either 1/8 or quarter notes, so I start there. The kick is a big factor in what makes a groove unique, but no matter the pattern, you'll often hear it on the first beat. So here we are with a really simple basic beat to start. Every beat is basically a variation of this foundation, so no matter what beat you end up with, you're going to go through this step. The second thing I add is the bass, and just like the drums, finding the right sound is key. So there's basically 3 options I have when it comes to creating a bass sound. I could play it in with a real bass guitar, I could use a sample from Splice, or I could use a synth bass, and a lot of neo soul R&B has synth basses, and of course we don't need an instrument to create the sound, so let's start there. When searching for a sound in a synth, presets are your compass, meaning they could point you in the right area, but you have to move in the direction of the sound that you want. The third thing is to add a keyboard or synth part. Now this can be tricky because it's hard to find a unique, cool sounding synth with a basic preset, so we want to be familiar with basic customizing of a synth sound. First and most importantly, be familiar with ADSR. These 4 meters control a lot of the sound. Attack is how quickly the sound is created. The slower the attack, the closer it is to a bowed sound. Decay, sustain, and release are all different levels of how long the note is. That's the basic function of all synthesizers, but let me tell you the key to the neo soul synth sound. Ready for the secret? Portamento. You see that little knob in the corner? The more you raise it, it gives the notes a glissando effect, and you hear this a lot in neo soul. FKJ, Mac Ayres, Tom Misch all include that sound. Now that we have a solid groove, we can sprinkle some guitar on top. Neo soul guitar is typically a clean sound, maybe some light reverb or delay. But of course, guitar effects are a whole world and you can lead with what you want to hear. But if we're making a classic neo soul guitar beat, I'm gonna stick with a clean sound. After we have our instruments in place, we start the premix. That's basically a quick organization of our tracks. Label the tracks, color coding is great for bigger sessions, and bussing tracks together. To make the drums sound real, if we bust them into one track, I could add the same plugin to the entire kit and give it a consistent sound. Start the mix with basic EQ. EQ is tricky at first, so here's my 3-step guide for beginner EQ training. Step 1, subtractive EQ. Only the kick and the bass should be in the lower frequencies, so I'll put a high pass filter or a low cut. Same thing, for some reason we use both these terms, high pass and low cut. Put a high pass filter on everything else besides the kick and the bass. With each instrument, place the filter right to where it doesn't change the tone of the instrument. Because we don't want to change the sound, we just want to eliminate the possible noise from the lower frequencies that we don't want to hear. Step 2, feng shui the low end. There's no hard and fast rule on how to do this, but with the kick and the bass both in the lower frequencies, we need to give them their own sonic space. If your kick is coming in at 50 Hz, you might want to EQ your bass at 200, and maybe even dip the kick at 200 to give even more space for that bass. Step 3, spot the bad frequencies. Occasionally an instrument can have this one nasty frequency that just sticks out and you want to get rid of it. So what you do is create a narrow EQ band, raise it, and search through the frequencies. And if there is a nasty one that pops out, that's your spot to lower it out of the mix. Now we got to create the room. Reverb is an essential part for gluing instruments together and making a beat sound organic. Generally, I wouldn't put reverb on a bass or kick track. Hats, snare, guitar, keys, a little bit goes a long way, but you don't want every instrument to be drowning in reverb. When we mix, we're trying to clean up a track so unwanted noise is out of the picture. Reverb is noise. The first thing to listen for to make sure a reverb isn't ruining your track is the low end. Majority of the time, you want to cut the low end of the reverb or put a high pass filter on it because we always want that low end clear for that bass and that kick. Compress that shit. Now, if you thought EQ was tricky, compression is about to bitch slap you in the face, metaphorically speaking. Full disclosure, I'm a guitar player and I'm still learning quite a bit in this world, and compression is certainly another world. It deals in these minute changes. If EQing is chipping off big blocks so we see the general form of a human in Michelangelo's David, compression is chiseling away so we see the minute details of his face. Even though it's a tricky world to navigate, presets are a beautiful thing, so experiment with that. And honestly, to start out, someone's gonna hate me for saying this, but put a compressor on everything. Bass, keys, guitar, especially compress that bus drum track. Getting those individual drum samples compressed together goes a long way in making that beat sound organic and tight. For the longest time, my amateur mindset didn't pay any attention to that master track at the end of the screen, and then I wondered why my tracks sound so bad. But before we get into the basics of mastering, what is mastering? Mastering is basically mixing the final product. So we EQ'd, compressed, added reverb and whatever additional effects and plugins to each individual track. Now we're going to do the same thing to the master track. Compression is important for our master track because it glues our instruments together and helps in evening out the dynamics of our track. A touch of reverb on the master can be nice too. One of those simple little things that can help give the feeling of the track being performed in a room. A basic EQ to cut the low end so the track isn't boomy, around 30 Hz is good. A limiter to tighten up the dynamics again and help prevent any strong notes from pushing our levels. And a loudness meter to see where the output of our track is at. Most platforms like Spotify or YouTube compress music files from -12 to -14 LUFS, so it's good to shoot for that range. All these steps are simply the starting points of what you should be paying attention to when producing a track and some loose rules of thumb. But when it comes to developing your artistic craft, I believe it's always helpful to play with the ideas you learn, even overusing them just to help you gain a stronger understanding of them. And as your familiarity grows with techniques such as EQ and compression, you'll know when is appropriate to use them.